Hello, students. I'm recording a video to help you with this week's module. So this week is week 3. So if you go into, in case you've forgotten this little drop-down list, here you go to modules and you go to module 3. And remember, you always start on that introduction and go through it in order, follow the flow, as you might remember me saying in previous videos, right? So what you want to do is go through here and see what your learning objectives is. Just take a look at that. In this particular week is all about getting the audience figured out and figuring out the text that you've chosen. Remember, you could only choose one of the texts that were provided. One of them was called Take a Break. The other one was called um, Beat the Clock. And then the third one was Happy Tech Workers, something like that. So those are the only 3 you could choose from. So remember that. Make sure you get got one that you can work with. And then you just go through and you take a look at the overview here, what you're going to learn, why are you going to learn those things, some tips for success. Just make sure you read all these. Obviously, I'm not going to read them to you. You're big boys and girls, right? So let's go to the next page. Now, in the guide, of course, in the guide here is going to be telling you about summarizing, the difference between summarizing, paraphrasing, and quoting, right? So one of your assignments is going to be about summarizing the text. And so you'll just make sure you read this and understand the key questions. Who's the author? What is the title? What is it about? Right? And then you're going to look at this information, gives you a hint as to how to do some of the quoting and citing stuff in the paper, right? So you want to make sure you cite that and use that. And as always, what's really important to make sure you use is the exemplar. So, and we'll see that here probably on the next page. But this information just gives you some information about the difference between, what these things are, summarizing and then quoting and citing and then paraphrasing, which is basically where you take a quote and you put it in your own words instead of quoting it, right? So this here gives you an example of what it would look like as a quote, and then this is how you might rewrite it in your own different words, and not that way you wouldn't have quotes, but you still have to cite it, right? A note on AI, just remember you cannot use AI, okay? AI is not allowed in the class. I prefer uh, I've suggested to students that they could use AI to help them like generate ideas for what to write about or use it to, in other words, to kind of create your do your brainstorming and stuff, but you cannot use it to write your papers. If you use it to write your paper, it will hurt you. It will hurt you because I will have to the first time usually I give you a break and just point out that it's AI and needs to be fixed, but if it happens after that, I'll pretty much just report it. Okay, so you got to make sure you don't use the AI. All right, and then the key concepts here. So let's go to the next page. Trying to keep this video from getting too long. So the resources page is always the most important page, usually, pretty much, because it tells you, or one of the most important pages, because it tells you what your required readings are. So you want to make sure you do these readings, and then well, sometimes it'll have videos and stuff too. This one looks like it's mostly just readings. And then here you have the MLA and APA resources. So this in the textbook on page 52 tells you how to do APA. So if you're going to be writing your paper in APA, you want to look at that. If you're going to be writing your work in MLA, you would want to look at this one, which is page 51, right? And then you get the style guides here as well to refer to. And those, if you go to these style guides, excuse me, they will show you, they'll have all kinds of information here about how to do APA. And this is an important place to go in to find out specific stuff. Like if you want to find out how to do a quote within a quote, and that's going to be something that you all are going to be doing when you cite certain articles, depending on the article you choose. Because if the article cites somebody else, then when and you decide to cite that secondary person, you have to cite it a certain way because that quote came within the article, right? So it's kind of a quote within a quote, or a source within a source. And the way you could type in here, how do I cite a source within a, and then it will bring up the rest of it here in the MLA. See, how do I cite a source quoted within another source? That's what I'm talking about. And if you want to look at it in MLA, for example, you just click on that and it'll show you how you do it. And so the way you do that is you say something like this: George Washington described his meeting with French officers, then a 21-year-old, in his diaries, and explained that the wine the officers drank banished their restraint. And then see, this is how you show that it's quoted within Barine. So this is George Washington's quote, but it's quoted within this author's article, Logan Barine's article. And so you say QTD in Barine, and then the page number. Remember, you always should have page or paragraphs number there. If let's just look real quickly at the APA version of that. Um, and that would be this one. And it is the difference is that you would say something like this. In-text citation will be, you would talk about Smith's study, and then as cited in Queenan. So instead of using QTD, it's the same thing. You're doing the same exact thing. It's just instead of using QTD period in, you're saying as cited in. That's the only difference. It's the same thing. You're citing a source within a source. Okay? So that's something that you can use, just an example of how you can use that style guide to really help you out. All right. Next page. Okay, discussion and sharing text. So in the discussion for this week, of course, you're going to have this specific type of discussion to do, and you just got to remember that you have to follow the instructions. Whatever it tells you to do in here, you do that. Right? For your initial post, it says to share the title of the article. You should always share the title of the articles at least, and it's fine to share the title and the author, but at least the title of the article. One or the other at least. And then it says list 2 audiences that you chose your product, and for each audience address the following: describe the audience, explain why you chose them. Right? And then these are the kind of the questions you will want to consider to answer as you do this part here, right? So these audiences are what you're going to be doing in your project, not the audiences that the writer wrote to in his article or her articles, but the audience you're going to write to, right? So make sure you get that understood, that this one is all about what you're going to do in your project, okay? Audience is the first version of your paper. Who are you going to write to? Remember that this must be a specific audience. Don't just say something like, my first audience will be anybody that can benefit from it. Obviously, that's the entire planet, right? So you don't want to say something like that. But you want to be very specific. And you also can't pick the same one that was the audience of the original article. So, for example, if the original article had audience was, say, seniors, I know one of them, I think it's, I forget which one it is. Take a break, I think maybe. If the audience for the original paper article itself was seniors and their caretakers, then you would want to choose a different audience that you think would also benefit from it. And that might be, you could keep it in the same area of expertise and say maybe management in the medical field, management in a medical facility or in a hospital or whatever, right? So make it something specific like that, right? The more specific your audience, the easier it will be to write to them and to do your assignments for them. Okay, then your audience, your second version needs to be a totally different audience again. So if this one here was the management in a hospital, this one maybe could be nurses in a hospital, right? You can go as specific as you want to, really. I mean, you could even go so far as saying um, female nurses in a hospital, or nurses with nurses who have their own children. The more specific, the better, right? And that way you could talk about how it affects those specific types of nurses. Female nurses have things to deal with maybe that male nurses don't, right? So anything you can do to make it more specific will help you to do a better job, right? So that's what you want to do when you do the discussion. Now remember, when you respond, you have to respond to at least 2 of your peers' posts, and when you do that, you want to respond to them by discussing these 3 elements. What do you find interesting about or admirable about their choices? Do you have any ideas about how the audience might connect beyond what they've thought of? And can you extend their ideas to expand the connections between audience? In other words, what can you describe as connections that you think might work well, right? How might they connect their audience to the article? And how might you help their audience your audience to understand how the article could apply to them specifically, right? So those are some things to consider. Now that's the discussion. Then you're going to get to the written response, and the written response is going to be, remember, you always got to click on this and go in to see the actual instructions. You got to follow the directions closely. Make sure you use the directions closely and follow them. Make sure you bring up the template and use the template. You got to do that. And then the most important thing is to choose and use the proper exemplar, because remember, the exemplar, once you bring that exemplar up, and here's why it's so important to be using the exemplars, and why you'll hear me harp on them so much, is that when you bring that exemplar up, you're going to see the what it says here. It's going to show you how to write it, how to think about it. Now, obviously, you can't just copy and paste this, but what this tells you is, for example, he says here, the text chosen for the project is what everyone needs, and then he says this text summarizes. You always got to follow it up. You don't just give the title. But in this case, it tells you to summarize the title. So you want to do what it tells you to do, and you always want to provide rationale more than just a basic answer, right? So this text summarizes advice and best practices from a series run by Harvard Business School called Getting More Work Done. It highlights the methods of how to get organized. This tells you, okay, this is how he did it. I should do the same thing with my article. And so you could just simply use this, model this to write it for your own response to your article, right? To summarize what your article is going to be about. And you just want to do that with all of them. And when you do a quote, you'll want to incorporate the quote. You want to make sure that you provide, see, this one can be tricky. I always have students who will just do one thing here, but you actually should do 2 things here. That's why it's good to copy and paste the template, because if you copy and paste a template, then you can just fill these things in as they are, where they are. And so quote would be the actual material you're going to use in quotation marks. Then the sentence would be how you're going to use a part of that quote. You don't have to use the whole thing. You can even just take part of it out. Like here, he said the most important work to align with peak energy as all he used out of here. And so notice you have to have a signal phrase, Roseman year 2015. This is APA, so remember you have to have that year there. Argues that workers should try to time then there's the quote part. More important work to align with periods of peak energy. Then you have the closing parenthesis. Then you have a space. And then here you always have a page or paragraph number. In your case, you should always be able to just put a page number, since the articles all have page numbers. So you just want to put a page number there in parentheses, and you use P period for this. In MLA, it's just a number. And then you put the period. That's how you do it. And then it tells you to take that same sentence and use a paraphrase, which is where you're going to put it in your own words and not have any quotation marks. So notice how he did that here. He said, according to Roseman year 2015, workers should know that their energy will vary throughout the day, so they should perform their key tasks during the most focused and energetic times of the day. Notice he's saying the same thing as they said here, but he's putting it all in his own different words. That's how you do a paraphrase. Put it in your own words, but you're saying the same thing. You still have to have that page number at the end, signal phrase at the beginning, and that's so important because that tells your audience, specifically me, where your source material starts and ends. That way it's easy for me to tell where your voice is from your sources. Right? Now, this here is nothing you have to do. You don't have to answer this part 4. It's just telling you what you should be doing as you're doing this. You should use your APA or MLA standards to cite this up here. So that's not an actual, I don't like the way they do that. They should probably just put this as a note instead of number 4, because this is only telling you what to do up here, right? It's guiding you as to what to do up here with your citations. So don't think you have to write anything for this. This is just telling you what to do up here. Okay? So that's how you do this, your assignment for this week. And then you have your rubric. And as you've heard me mention before, the rubric is a good thing to look at maybe at the beginning just to see what all needs to be in it. But the most important thing to use the rubric for is to, use your exemplar first and let it show you how to write it, like I just showed you. And then when you're done writing your assignment, go through and look at this and say, okay, did I do this? Did I do this? Did I do this? And you just use it as a checklist to make sure you've got everything that's to look for. Because these are all the exact things I'll be looking at. Your summary, your quote, your paraphrase, your in-text citations, and then how well you wrote. Your clear communication. So you want to just look through and ask yourself, did I do these things? If you want to get a 100% grade, you make sure you did it this way. If you don't do it that way, if you do some things a little less well, then you might get partially meets. So just always shoot for the best. Always shoot for doing what you should do and going, maybe sometimes even go above and beyond, and that way you're going to do well on it. All right? And then the next thing is going to simply be the decision tree. Well, that's module 4, so that's never mind. So that's basically it for module. Let me get back to the table of contents. Because the last thing that you should see in module 3, I don't know why it didn't take me to this, but the last thing you should see after the written response is the how to do well. And you always want to look at that too. How to do well will tell you how to connect your thinking and how to connect your work from one sentence or from one week to the next. So that's why it's good to look at that ahead of time. All right. So that will do it for this video. It went way longer than I expected it to, but I wanted to make sure you had some good information to help you. So as always, if you have questions, need help with anything, just let me know.